Good afternoon. We're going to give a couple of minutes for folks to be able to hop on, and then we will get started.
Some of you are too young to understand how this works, but this is not new for some of us old people that had party lines. This is the way it was. You would call somebody, and then everybody in your neighborhood would pick up the phone and listen to the conversation and see what was going on. Party lines. So this is kind of a party line thing, right?
So in 1980, dealing with regulation of the telephone utility at that time, we had to order Mountain Bell to upgrade their system to all single party lines. So it went from 8 and 10 party lines to over a 5-year period. But if the commission had not intervened, they wouldn't have done it. They weren't going to invest in rural communities.
Yeah, it kind of hurt the rural communities, though, because this was a way of finding out when there were problems in other people's families and what was happening at the school and who was in trouble with their banker, without, you get the information directly from your neighbors by listening in.
Everything has trade-offs. Kind of hard to court over a multi-party line.
Well, welcome for folks that are hopping on. We are going to start our program in just a minute. So wonderful. So good afternoon and welcome to today's virtual event, Unraveling the Public Service Commission, or the PSC. I'm Whitney Tawney, Executive Director of Montana Conservation Voters, and I'll be moderating our event. We've all been racked by the latest energy price increase approved by the Montana Public Service Commission, so we're turning to the experts to learn more about this important elected body and how we as citizens can be more involved. First, we'll hear from Upper 7 Law's Litigation Director, Constance van Kley, who is the lead attorney for our lawsuit, alongside a bipartisan group of Montanans challenging the gerrymandered PSC map ahead of the 2024 election. Then we'll hear from former PSC Commissioner Tom Schneider, who served on the commission for 12 years, where he fought doggedly for consumers like you and I every single day. And Brian Schweitzer, an American farmer who served as the 23rd governor of Montana from 2005 to 2013. Governor Schweitzer is also the author of Power Up Energy, How the Coming Revolution Will Empower You, Free Us All from Oil Wars, and Make You a Buck or Two. And after our fireside style chat with Governor Schweitzer and Commissioner Schneider, we'll open up the channels for a Q&A and then close out our event. Please note that this is a recorded event that will be shared with MCV's membership next week. So let's get started. Constance, please take it away with an update on the latest from the court.
Thank you, Whitney. As Whitney mentioned, Montana conservation voters and a bipartisan group of individual voters filed a lawsuit in October challenging the PSC district map as an unconstitutional partisan gerrymander. So I'm going to talk really briefly about the case, kind of what our theory is, and give an update on the litigation. I'll try to keep it short, and I'll also try to stay out of the weeds. So I would like to just hit a few topics. First, what is a partisan gerrymander? Second, why are partisan gerrymanders a problem? And third, how does the legislature do a partisan gerrymander? How do we prove it in court? And then I'll just tell you very quickly where we are in the litigation. So starting with what is a partisan gerrymander? A gerrymander generally is using the redistricting process to create districts that aren't kind of naturally responsive to the interests of the voters. So a racial gerrymander will split blocks of voters on the basis of their race in order to prevent them from effectively influencing the political process. A partisan gerrymander similarly will break up a block of similarly minded voters who share the same interests, in order to election proof a particular statewide entity. Partisan gerrymandering is a way in which a dominant political party can take advantage of their dominance at a point in time in order to entrench its power going forward. It's really dangerous because it not only is it a current abuse of power, but it prevents the political process from responding to changes in voting behavior, to changes in people's ideas about how their government is doing their job. So ordinarily in Montana, we have a bipartisan districting and apportionment commission that does the work of districting. This does a really good job of preventing partisan gerrymanders because the process, the entity that's actually redistricting our state legislative districts and federal congressional districts is bipartisan by design. But they don't redistrict the PSC, because when our Constitution went into effect in 1972, the PSC wasn't a districted entity. The legislature did that later, and it took the task of redistricting for itself. And it hasn't done a tremendously good job of redistricting regularly or ensuring that redistricting is happening fairly. Most recently in 2023, leading to the lawsuit, the legislature drew districts in a way that is designed to ensure that districts are not competitive, so that the decision about who is going to be a particular PSC commissioner will happen primarily in the primary, because the districts are drawn in a way to really prevent non-Republican voters from influencing the outcome of elections. That doesn't mean it's impossible, right? It just means it's a lot harder than it should be if the system were fair. And so I'm going to show you a couple of charts that our expert in the case put together that show exactly how the legislature did that. So this is the first one. And what you see here, they're called box and whisker charts. And each one shows a different election in 2020. So let's take a look at the presidential election. It's the green chart on each one. Now the middle 50% represents, or the little box in the middle represents the middle 50% of likely outcomes for a particular district. And the lines at the top and at the bottom show the middle 99% of likely outcomes. And this is drawn by randomly generating, in this case, 100,000 different maps. What would you expect to see? And what you can see from the enacted plan, which is the big dot in this map, is that if you look at what shows up as number 2 on this chart, this is District 3 of the PSC. This district is more Democratic than 99% of reasonable possibilities. And then you look at District 5, and District 5 is less Democratic than 99% of reasonable possibilities. And what that shows you, I mean, is exactly what you would assume looking at the map, that Democratic voters were taken from District 5 and they were moved into the adjacent district, which is PSC District 3. This is called cracking and packing, and it's the classic sign of partisan gerrymandering. And I have just one more chart to show you, and then I'll turn it over to the governor and Commissioner Schneider for the main event. This chart here shows the responsiveness of the plan that the legislature put into effect in 2023. And that little kind of like courthouse or legislature symbol, this yellow sign, this shows what the current map does, what it takes in terms of vote share in order to influence the election. Again, this doesn't mean it's destiny, but it does mean that this is what the legislature was trying to do. The chart, the gray in the middle, shows, again, 100,000 reasonable outcomes. And what it takes to shift even one vote or even one house under, or one district under an ordinary set of circumstances is over a majority Democratic vote statewide. That's what it takes. That's what the legislature was trying to do. And so the legislature was taking advantage of the PSC as a down ballot race and assuming that partisanship is going to be destiny. In the court case, we're fighting against this map because the map really needs to be responsive to the will of the voters. It's not okay. It's not constitutional for the legislature to try to engineer a specific result. In the electoral politics, which is not something that I'm going to talk about, it just means that there's a higher burden than there really fairly should be. So where we are in the case right now is we've asked for a preliminary injunction. We are waiting on that ruling. And as soon as we find out what the court says, we will pass it on to Whitney and everybody at MCV. And I'm sure that they'll do a really good job of getting the word out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Constance, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. Constance will be back to join us for the Q&A section. Now, Commissioner Schneider and Governor Schweitzer, let's kick off the fireside chat with a question to help center our conversation. What the heck is the PSC and what are they responsible for? Governor, can you take us or take the first shot here?
Well, Tom's the expert because he actually did the job. But, you know, just historically, so that we understand how we get our electricity and natural gas in Montana, going all the way back to the Anaconda Company. They were the ones that were building the dams and creating the electricity and then selling the electricity. And ultimately, they created the Montana Power Company that operated for nearly 100 years in Montana. And along the way, it was decided, like everywhere else in the country, it doesn't make sense to have 2 or 3 utilities operating down the same city block. How would it make sense to have Company A, Company B, and Company C all having wires running down your street so you could have competition and decide who you're going to buy your electricity from? So we went to these so-called monopolies. So in Montana, like a lot of the other states, we have monopolies, and one of the monopolies we have is this company from South Dakota called NorthWestern Energy, who manages a lot of the electricity and natural gas in Montana. And but since they're a monopoly, we guarantee them a profit. They're the only company, but there is a Public Service Commission, and Tom will tell us about that, that steps in and represents the ratepayers. There needs to be somebody that says, whoa, hold on there, cowboy. I don't think you can charge that much, and ask some tough questions. And that's what they do, right, Tom?
That pretty well gets to the bottom of it. There's the commission really was established to provide a counterbalance to a monopoly. This is not free enterprise competitive market. This is a monopoly. And if you do not believe in regulation because of some core political views, you really are vulnerable and accepting of kind of the domination of the monopoly. There are the commission itself, public service commissioners are responsible and were established by the legislature. They're supposed to provide and assure that this monopoly provider provides safe, adequate, and reliable electric and gas service at fair, just, and reasonable rates. There are legal standards that are applied, and everything the commission does is subject to court review. So there is a framework there that is parallel to most commissions in the country, a lot of precedent. And I can say without hesitation that over the last decade and a half, Montana has failed miserably in the way they're constituted as commissioners and in their performance, both individually, collectively, substantively, procedurally. Everything is an embarrassment and a flaw. And the people that are paying for it are Montana families and Montana small businesses.
But Tom, I thought when you were serving on the Public Service Commission, it was considered a full-time job. I thought that your job was to show up, ask the tough questions, do your research, and make sure that 40 hours a week you're representing the interest of homeowners and small businesses. But I look at this Public Service Commission that we've got now, and they sort of call it in. They have other jobs elsewhere, and they just assume that if NorthWestern Energy says they need to spend some more money, then we need to raise the rates on the ratepayers. Has something changed along the way since you were doing the job?
What's changed along the way is the dedication, the commitment, the philosophy of that sitting commissioners. I'm embarrassed. It's not anything that I experienced in 12 years serving on the commission, from back in the middle 1970s until my recent term that ended in 2006. Montana had a reputation as an aggressive regulator. They had regulatory standards and decision-making processes that stacked up well against the most, compared to the most progressive and consumer-oriented commissions in the country. That really has flipped. And now, I mean, it's a full-time plus job. It's not 40 hours. If you want to do the job to really represent and protect and provide that counterbalance to the monopoly, you need to be on the job. You need to be digging into the testimony, doing discovery, asking cross-examination questions, making sure the staff has fully investigated the positions of the various parties, make sure that the meetings are open and that the decision-making process is transparent to the public. That has all failed in this last go-round of the commission order, where they granted a 28% increase to residential customers. That is unconscionable in terms of the process and in terms of the result.
So they raised the rates by 28% after the legislature raised taxes on homeowners so that they could cut taxes for NorthWestern Energy by $20 million. I think NorthWestern, the South Dakota company, is the largest property tax payer in Montana, and Burlington Northern Santa Fe is the second largest property tax payer in Montana. And I would have thought the legislature and the governor would have thought this thing through and said, all right, what are we getting for our money? Do you think Burlington Northern Santa Fe, Warren Buffett, is going to lower the cost of shipping wheat to Portland because he got a big tax break in Montana? Well, obviously, the company from South Dakota, NorthWestern Energy, got a huge tax break, 20 million, and then they raised the rate on ratepayers by, what did you say, 28%?
That was the increase to residential customers. There's something there that I'm missing, and what I'm missing is that the legislature, at the beck and call of NorthWestern, established an automatic mechanism to increase customer rates for property taxes. That is, the theory behind it was, if the state makes a decision on property taxes, it needs to be flowed through directly into rates. And most of the time taxes have increased, and the utility is very prompt about implementing those immediate tax or rate increases to reflect property taxes. In this case, with a big property tax decrease to the monopoly NorthWestern, there should be an immediate rate decrease related to that component of rates. That property tax is an important component, but it's not the only component. So there should be a direct offset to the benefit that they receive, because they demanded that the legislature put in this automatic provision.
But I think, Tom, if I may, and I know we have some members of the press on this call. I hope we do anyway. And that's an important part of what the press needs to do, is to ask these tough questions. The press needs to show up and do their research and ask these tough questions. But what I'm looking at right now among politicians in Montana is there'll be a story written, and I'll read the story, and it'll say that this research has been going on, but they contacted the commissioner, or they contacted the legislator, or they contacted the governor or the senator, and well, they didn't get back to them by press time. Or that somebody who graduated from college last year in New Jersey, who represents one of these elected officials, responded by one sentence. We need a press that pushes these public service commissioners, that raises the question, where are you? Why weren't you asking these tough questions? How is it that we managed to raise these rates and lower their taxes? Now, again, it is complicated. This is complicated. We understand that. We do have members of the press. Tom Ludy, I hope you agree, Tom. Tom Ludy from the Billings Gazette, he's as knowledgeable about energy in Montana as certainly anybody in the press, but maybe anybody serves on the Public Service Commission. And I think he's still writing some tough stories. We need the rest of the press to join in.
Actually, Montana, during my 45-year career in these issues, Montana's been very fortunate to have a series of very aggressive, smart, talented investigative reporters from the middle 70s forward. And I agree with your assessment of the role that Tom Ludy plays for the Lee and Gazette papers. He is very knowledgeable, he's aggressive, and he does pursue the tough questions. So I think Montana actually over the years has been very fortunate, at least at the Public Service Commission level. There was a lot of visibility, a lot of coverage. They were at the work sessions for direction every day. They were at all the public hearings. And, I think the Johnsons and the Dennisons and the Tom Katinskis and Marge Charlier from back in the 70s at the Gazette, honest to goodness, we have been lucky to date. And it's essential. The press plays a critical role in terms of making sure that the spotlight is on these activities by the company and by the commissioners.
Well, I think even better than that. I know that all of my meetings were open, so the press was always there.
That's
and
right.
Oftentimes I'd get a question or something would come up about the history of how something happened. And my gosh, I'd turn to Chuck Johnson or Mike Dennison and say, then they'd give us the history. They'd tell us what Schwinden did and what Judge did and maybe what Roscoe did. And I saw them as a resource because they had information. And what's more, I saw them as a voice for the people to be in government. And I hope that we have a a press that is willing to push these elected officials now so that they understand that part of their job is to tell the people that elected them what they're doing and why they're doing it.
I, of course, can't agree with you more. That they play a really essential role.
So one of the other essential roles, of course, is that commissioner role. So with the current PSC map from the legislature, districts 2, 3, and 4 are up for election this year. So what's the ideal profile of a PSC candidate in your mind? And Commissioner, I'd love for you to kick us off here.
Well, I'll just, I'll provide some adjectives, but I want to make a distinction at the outset that the perfect candidate may not be the perfect or ideal commissioner. But the key is, if you don't get elected, it doesn't matter how good you are or how smart you are. So Governor Schweitzer is premier in the political arena. But I would say that in terms of characteristics, I look for somebody at their core that believes that they have an essential role or could have an essential role in protecting Montana families and Montana small businesses and the state collectively in terms of protection from these monopoly practices. And so if you do not believe that regulation is important, we sure as hell don't need you there. Vision, leadership, business savvy, some particular expertise in things like economics, finance, accounting, law, engineering, all of those natural professions, give you a grounding, a credibility, and the ability to think things through and to ask the tough questions that Governor Schweitzer talked about. Those are important. You need to have a healthy skepticism about what this monopoly track record is and what their game plan is going forward. They're blatant. They're rough in the legislature. They are protecting one thing, and that's the bottom line for the South Dakota investors and or company. And you don't all have to be experts in the field, but you do have to have a core belief that you represent the people and the families of Montana, the right to a clean, healthful environment, just like any other state agency. You need to make sure that these monopolies toe the line. We've got one that's out of control. I mean, they are an outlier in the whole region. They're clinging on to outdated, fully depreciated by any other standard coal plants that are aging, more expensive, building ongoing environmental liabilities, and the commission is not stepping in to demand that they follow the integrated resource planning laws that were established to make good resource decisions. At the bottom of the day, or at the bottom of the at the end of the day, the really big expensive things relate to in your bills relate to the resources and the transmission system. And Montana Power and then NorthWestern after them have been going down the wrong track by themselves for a couple of decades.
I think you have to be able to ask questions and continue to ask questions and continue to push the utilities. You're not going to be an expert when you get there. You won't even be the world's greatest expert when you leave. But you've got to ask the tough questions, and you have to ask those questions from the perspective of the homeowners and the small businesses in Montana that are stuck with this monopoly. They are stuck with this monopoly because that is the law. And we have 5 people that can stand up to them. Now, when I see members of the Public Service Commission that have lunch 3 or 4 days a week with the people from South Dakota, and they go out to a bar and they never have to buy a drink because there's a utility lobbyist buying it for them. When I see that they're getting PAC money from these utilities to get elected and reelected, I would say those are exactly the wrong people. I want public service commissioners to come to Helena and say, I didn't take any PAC money from you, the South Dakota company, and you're not going to tell me what to do, and I won't drink that whiskey. I'll pay for my own if I'm going to drink whiskey, and maybe I won't even drink any whiskey while I'm in this town. So those are some of the characteristics that we need, but they got to ask tough questions. Yeah, of course, we'd like them all to be electrical engineers or having been CEOs of corporation or having been leaders in organizing people. But not all of those folks want to run for the Public Service Commission. But we need good thinkers. We need people that are willing to ask tough questions. I mean, when I ran for governor, guy running against me, he'd been in government for 30 years and he kept pointing at me and saying, how could this guy run the state of Montana? He's never even been in the bathroom in the Capitol. I have to agree with him. I hadn't been. I was busy farming and ranching and running businesses all over the world. But I was a good question asker. I always want to know how come. Why not? What if? And that is the job of somebody on the Public Service Commission. And it wouldn't be a bad idea if they did a little research outside of Montana and see what other public service commissions are doing and how they're managing these utilities for the protection of the ratepayers. That's the kind of people that we need. Now, let me just say this. If you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or you're an independent, if you're going to run for the Public Service Commission, remember who you work for. It's not NorthWestern Energy. It's for the folks back home. And you know what? There's a lot of Republicans that own small businesses and have homes that had their taxes go up on their businesses and their homes. And now they have their utilities go up. And they're kind of mad. Some are Republican, some are Democrat. So if you're a Republican and you want to run for the Public Service Commission, remember who you're working for. If you're a Democrat, remember who you're working for. It is not the utilities. It's the ratepayers.
That's a great segue into our next question, because we've covered who the PSC is, what they do, the latest drama, and what an ideal candidate for the PSC looks like. So how can Montanans get involved? And Governor, let's hear from you first.
Well, I'll tell you what, it wouldn't be a bad idea to look around neighbors that might want to run for the Public Service Commission. Some of them have been a county commissioner. Some of them have run for the legislature. Some have been in the legislature. Some of them are just community leaders. And maybe see if you can't talk some of those folks into running for the Public Service Commission. Or if you've already heard about somebody who's thinking about running for the Public Service Commission, call them and find out, are they going to represent you? Or do they understand how the Public Service Commission, do they understand that the way it works with a monopoly is we guarantee them a profit? And so we're guaranteeing them a profit, and the bigger they can build their enterprise, the greater amount of money they're going to be paid. So of course, NorthWestern Energy is always going to want to build more transmission, more generation, more, because the more they build, the more they can charge you. It isn't necessarily in your best interest. Now we have to keep up with what the needs of Montana, but that often isn't what drives the utility. So we need candidates that will ask the tough questions. And you as a citizen, you can help some of these people get elected. I mean, the Public Service Commission right now is probably more important than electing whoever your legislator is, because the legislature is dominated by a single party. It's going to be that way for a while, I think. The Public Service Commission, there's 3 seats that are coming up right now. And if we could put 3 people there, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, if we could put 3 people on there that would start asking the tough questions, then we would have representation as ratepayers in Helena. Because right now I can tell you, we have 5 members of the Public Service Commission that do not represent the ratepayers. And they prove it every week and every month and every day.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to what the governor said. I subscribe to all that. And he really is the politically savvy one here. I think it's really important and a good opportunity for people to join organizations and support organizations and individual candidates in terms of these important races. It's important to join organizations that are involved. We again have been blessed over the years to have some really active public interest oriented organizations that have participated and developed the evidence and the record before the commission in challenging NorthWestern and Montana Power before them, that have represented low income groups, renewable energy, conservation, the importance of a clean and healthful environment, protection of residential and small customers from having their costs or having to bear costs that otherwise should be borne by the largest users. Those are issues. So MEIC, Northern Plains, Montana Conservation Voters, Northwest Energy Coalition, the human rights and low income advocates, those organizations collectively provide important information and involvement in the commission proceedings. At the end of the day, the commission decisions are based on the record in the case, the evidence in the case. And to the extent that those organizations contribute to challenging the utilities, challenging them on their resource decisions, their investments, whether they're prudent or not, whether what they're doing is cost effective. You get leverage if you're part of somebody that's in the fight. And so you get involved in the campaigns, you get involved in encouraging people that have some strengths, some skill set, some passion, and get them onto the commission. And then participate in these organizations that are actually doing the work of challenging every day, challenging the utility, because it's a monopoly. It's looking out for one thing. And that one thing has been very, very destructive and expensive for the people of Montana. We have the highest residential rates in the region. We have the highest resource cost for Colstrip 3 and 4 of any other electric supply in their mix of resources. They've got hydro, they've got a modest amount of wind. We've got a great potential, but we're mired down in the past and in terms of a focus on fossil fuels. And unless we get people there that have some passion about it, we're going to continue down this merry chase after outdated technology.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you both so much. So we're starting to get some questions in through our chat, and the chat is open. So encouraging folks to definitely respond there. We're going to try and get to all of our questions. We're monitoring the chat window, but we've got quite a few questions already coming in, which is great. So our first question is actually a question for Constance. This is coming from Tom Ludi of the Billings Gazette. So of course, the filing deadline for candidates is less than a month away. Has there been any indication from the court that the decision on the injunction is likely to come before the candidate filing deadline?
Yes, we had a hearing about 2 weeks ago. At the hearing, the court said that it would try to get out an order as soon as possible. I'm just like furiously refreshing my email 100% of the time. So we expect it at any point, but we don't know for sure when it will happen. I do think we probably will see it sooner rather than later, and certainly ahead of the filing deadline.
Thank you. And we have a question from an anonymous attendee. And Governor, I think if you could kick us off with this question, that would be great. So Monica Trinnell tried to run for the PSC Region 2, very qualified, but people voted Republican regardless of her being a good candidate. How do you change that?
Yeah, I don't know. People like to say that, oh, Montana has become much more Republican. It's changed a great deal. But then, you know, the only reason I became governor is because when I decided to run for governor, none of the rest of the Democrats did, because they'd already come to the conclusion that a Democrat couldn't win the race. And so they let a farmer from Whitefish just go ahead and run out there and get beat. I think in particular now, Republicans and Democrats alike can agree that something is going wrong in Helena to allow us to raise taxes on homeowners, lower taxes for out-of-state corporation like NorthWestern Energy, and allow NorthWestern Energy to raise your rates. If you think just voting for Republicans to fill in those slots with the rest of the Republicans in the Public Service Commission is going to be in your best interest, well, then just close your eyes and vote. But if you think maybe having somebody asking a question, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, might be helpful, if you think maybe somebody ought to say, now wait just a damn minute. I represent the folks back home, not the people that are buying the whiskey here in Helena. Then maybe we can find somebody that we can elect. And so I think for you potential candidates, just go out and talk to people. Let them know who you are. Let them know that you will ask the tough questions. Let them know you'll be on your side and you're not going to forget when you get down there to Helena and the company from South Dakota is trying to take you to lunch, or even maybe fly you to some kind of a conference in Las Vegas or in Phoenix or in Florida in the middle of the winter.
Well, that's great. Tom, do you have anything to add, or should we move on to our next question?
That sounded good to me.
All right. So this is another question from Tom Ludi. This one is for Commissioner Schneider. In October, when issuing the final order on NorthWestern Energy's 2022 general rate case, one of the commissioners said she had to defer to the Consumer Council when it came to consumer matters whenever the Consumer Council intervened in the case. What are your thoughts on the commission defaulting to the opinion of the Consumer Council?
The Consumer Council plays an important role, but they are not the decision maker. They're an advocate, an important advocate in a case. The commissioner, has totally misconstrued the basic responsibility of the commission. They've abdicated that responsibility. They have failed to recognize and to fulfill their responsibility to protect consumers. I just shook my head when I read Tom's coverage of that, the meeting, and I wrote an op-ed about it that appeared in the dailies in early November. Tom Ludi did a follow-up extensive article on the motions for reconsideration by other interveners who said, you know, the procedures that were used here, the decisions did not give us due process. The commissioners don't even recognize that it's their responsibility to protect us. You know, that's really what got me back in the game here. I was so appalled by that kind of arrogant shifting of responsibility. It is misplaced. the commissioners have failed us.
So here's a question from Mark Spring, and he's asking, does MCV support any of the PSC candidates currently? And I will just say that we are going to have an endorsement process for 2024. And after the filing deadline, we'll be going public with our endorsement memo on our process. And so stay tuned, but we are hopeful to have some candidates that are pro-conservation in those races. Another question we have, this comes in from William. Why do we still have a monopoly? The PSC must cost us $10 million or more in addition to energy costs. A 2017 report from the Retail Energy Supply Association found that customers in states that still have a monopoly utility saw their average energy price increase nearly 19% from 2008 to 2017, while prices fell 7% in competitive markets over the same period.
Well, we went through deregulation. That didn't work out very well. That was a political decision in 1997. Came close to bankrupting the state. The competitive market failed at that time. You remember the Enron scandal and all the mess there. NorthWestern sold their most attractive generation resources, ended up buying it back. That's really at the core of why rates are so high in Montana. So we've kind of been through that retail competitive aspect. Did not work out well, especially for small customers. The large customers continue to play in the competitive market, probably to their advantage now compared to dealing with Montana Power or NorthWestern's energy rates. But I don't subscribe to your assessment of the viability of that process now in Montana. I was one of the advocates who thought that public ownership offered real promise during that period of time. If the public could have collectively chosen to go the public ownership route, whether it was individual municipalities or preferably a public entity to take it over, that wasn't without risk. But I thought at the time, and still believe, that public ownership offers the real alternative to this investor-owned mess in Montana. The commission can fulfill a lot of that role if they do their job.
If we could find a way of delivering electricity that didn't require transmission, it might make sense. But the problem is that we're not going to be in a position where we'll get competition in the wires that run down the street. So I guess it's possible that you could have a public-owned transmission system and delivery system, and then have competition in who's selling the electricity. We already have that to some extent, but then we have a legislature that acts more like Putin than they ought to. Our legislature in Montana, we had utilities on the West Coast that some 35 years ago invested in coal plants in Montana. And they were delivering electricity through big transmission lines from Montana all the way to Portland and Seattle and elsewhere. But, you know, planned obsolescence, you got a plant that's 30 some years old and it was time for them to start pulling out. Well, the Montana legislature said, no, you can't start pulling out. We're going to tell you how much you must spend on a 32-year-old coal plant on an annual basis. And we will have our attorney general explain to your engineers what it is that they must do and what they cannot do. That was the Montana legislature acting like Putin. So I'm not sure that we're in a position of getting completely away from the monopoly. Now, one of the things that's going to get us there, and you can debate how soon we're going to get to electric cars and trucks, it's coming. It might be later than what some people expect. But if we had time of use metering, in Montana, so that you would learn to use your electricity when the rates are the lowest. You would set your dishwasher to run in the middle of the night instead of 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You would do whatever you could do to make sure that you were buying your electricity at the lowest rate when you charged your car. But if it was time of use metering and every charge station in Montana allowed you to sell electricity back, you drive your car the 15 miles to work and you plug it in. At 10 o'clock in the morning, suddenly there's a huge demand for electricity for schools and for businesses and all the rest of it. And your car and every other car in Montana starts selling electricity right back into the grid and selling it for more than they paid for it in the middle of the night. What we really need is we need storage of electricity. We need a battery system or large scale storage as pumped dams, pumped water, so that we now can use these alternative energies. Montana's been in the wind business for a very long time. Back in 1925, Montana had some of the biggest wind businesses in the world. We had folks in Circle that were selling their wind chargers all over the world and were recognized for that leadership. One time I asked my dad, what was the biggest change on the farm when the REA, the rural electrification, brought electricity to the farm? He thought about it for a little bit. He said, yeah, well, it was back, before FDR, the towns in Montana, the bigger towns in Montana had electricity, but none of the small towns or the farms had electricity delivered from a utility. So we all had wind chargers with batteries in the basement, and the batteries would sometimes freeze in the winter. But I said, no, Dad, what was the biggest change on the farm when actually those wires came from a utility to deliver to the farm? He thought about it a little bit, and then he said, well, I suppose that we could weld at a little hotter temperature, because they had electricity before the REA showed up. We need to have a system that gets us back to that. And if we could get time of use metering, then allows small producers to enter the market. We already have, you can put solar panels on your house, you can put wind chargers up, and it allows you to do net metering. But gosh, you ought to be able to sell it at a higher price when people really need that electricity. And so there's some changes we could do. The rest of the world, most of the industrialized world has utilities that sell time of use metering. So I guess Montana will join the rest of the world after 105 other countries are doing it.
So my overall quick response to the question that the person posed about competitive markets, Montana is actually very well positioned to transition away from dependence on Colstrip 3 and 4 and the need for gas plants in Laurel and other places. We've got a transmission system that you and I, all the small businesses and families have paid for since the middle 70s. Well, when they came online in 83 and 84. That Colstrip transmission line is the lifeline, economic lifeline to the competitive markets for services from renewable energy that replaces and transitions away from the existing coal plants. We did a major study in 2018, megawatt per megawatt replacement of Colstrip with renewables, maintained a safe, adequate, and reliable transmission system, provided more flexibility to access competitive markets in the West, gave us an economic incentive to invest in renewables. We've got a great infrastructure down in the Colstrip area. We've got workers down there that are highly skilled. We've got an infrastructure in substations and transmission. We really are well positioned for the energy future in Montana. And NorthWestern and Talon Energy have been the blockages to this. They've litigated it, and they've fought with the other owners of the plants that are wanting to get out and shut down those old age plants. They're clinging to them because they've got a sweetheart deal that they got in 2008. There's a built-in conflict of interest there. They're holding on to it. And you and I are paying for it every day in excessive rates.
One of the greatest treasures we have in Montana is that transmission line that was built from Colstrip to the West Coast. It goes through some lands that you probably would never get permits to put those transmissions in again. But here's what's important. When you look at the wind energy of Montana in central Montana and compare it to the wind energy in the Columbia River Basin, the problem with wind is it doesn't blow all the time. That's what everybody's always saying. But you know, in the Columbia River Basin and in the Colstrip area, we have winds that are polar opposites, day versus night, winter versus summer, and you can firm wind on wind if you just tied the Columbia River Basin system with the central Montana 85% of the time. Well, that's pretty dang good.
That is good. So we have time for just one more question. Thank you, everybody who's been sending in questions. We've had over 20 questions already come in, which is really amazing. We will be following up with folks to answer questions, and then we also will provide an email with further contact information. So if folks want to reach out. So this question comes from Dan Stevenson. A new commissioner is going to need to be ready for a big lift given the present situation. How would a candidate and a new commissioner best prepare themselves for it? What is the support network needed and available to assist that candidate get up to speed and represent the people of Montana as effectively as possible?
Call Tom Schneider. That'd be my first phone call I'd make. I would talk to some previous public service commissioners. There's been some good ones. And, they would be able to tell you where the pitfalls are. And they would help you on day one be able to ask the tough questions.
Again, I mentioned earlier the importance of public interest groups that have been actively involved. MEIC, Northern Plains, Northwest Energy Coalition. There are a number of them that have resources on staff and that have contracted with expert witnesses over the decades. They're critical and they are really up to speed. They, along with, keep track of the work that Ludi does and others. There are others that are focused on these issues now, which I very much appreciate. There are resources available to help bring a candidate up to speed and hopefully new commissioners up to speed. I'd be happy to talk to you.
And I'll just add on MCV's part is that we will have folks on the coordinated side, which means that they can be talking to folks on the campaign trail and providing a candidate memo around kind of how to talk about issues, what the latest polling looks like around issues, etc. So that will be produced also here early spring, along with our candidate endorsement memo. So I just wanted to flag that as well. So you've heard it here, folks. The PSC is important. And the filing deadline for Montana's political candidates in 2024 is fast approaching. It's March 11th. We've listed our email here as mcv@mtvoters.org. So please feel free to reach out with any questions or to let us know if you're interested in running for office. Thanks again for being here today. The work to protect Montana for future generations starts with you. And a very special thanks to our experts, Constance van Kley, Commissioner Schneider, and Governor Brian Schweitzer. Remember, together, we can protect Montana as the last best place. Let's get to work. This place is worth fighting for. And thank you again for being here and have a great rest of your week.